Hello and welcome back to our series of lectures on Chapter 24 in biology. As you can recall, during part one of the lecture, we ended at slide 37 of the PowerPoint. And remember, these PowerPoints are up, published in the modules. And so this PowerPoint, the specific PowerPoint is up there published in module 2. The PowerPoint for Chapter 24. So let's start in then on slide 37. So we're going to start out then by mentioning that there are a few limitations to the biological species concept. So for example, the biological species concept cannot be applied to fossils or asexual organisms. That includes all prokaryotes. And remember that prokaryotes are the bacteria, basically, bacteria and archaea. So the biological species concept can't be applied to fossils because obviously we don't know whether or not those fossil individuals could reproduce or not between different populations of them. And then of course asexual organisms, they don't go through sexual reproduction, and so we can't test whether or not they can actually reproduce with each other. So that's one limitation of the biological species concept. The other thing is that it emphasizes biological species concept emphasizes the absence of gene flow. However, gene flow can occur between morphologically and ecologically distinct species. There can be gene flow between different species. In some cases. For example, grizzly bears, they're considered different species than polar bears. Grizzly bears and polar bears can actually mate and produce viable offspring that are called growler bears. You could have called them growler bears, either growler bears or pizzly bears, and I guess they went for growler bears. So here's a grizzly bear, Ursus arctos, and here's a polar bear, Ursus maritimus. And here's a growler bear then, cross between the two. So there are some limitations to the biological species concept. But there are other definitions of species as well. And other species concepts then emphasize the unity within a species rather than the separateness of different species. There's a morphological species concept. Do you remember morphology then from part one of our talk on Chapter 24? Morphology. Morphology is the physical form that something takes. So morphological concept defines a species by some sort of structural features. So it applies to both sexual and asexual species, but relies on criteria that are kind of subjective and sometimes kind of hard to define. There is an ecological species concept as well. And it defines the species in terms of the ecological niche of these groups. A niche, or you might want to say niche, the more French pronunciation. A niche or niche is just the role the species plays in its community. For example, the ecological niche of a dandelion is to perform photosynthesis, perform food for pollinators, and also food for herbivores that eat it. The niche of a squirrel is to gather nuts and be annoying to cats and dogs. So the ecological species concept then is just, defines it in terms of what ecological niche it occupies. So we can apply it to both sexual and asexual species. It emphasizes the role of disruptive selection. And many species, but it's got its limitations as well. Many species definitions have been proposed, and the usefulness of each one depends on the situation and the research questions being asked. And so speciation can take place with or without geographical separation. In other words, being in separate geographical areas. So speciation can occur in two ways, either with geographical separation or without geographic separation. So if you look at, let's say, there's a lake, but there's a shift in the land, and all of a sudden, the lake splits into two different bodies of water. Well, maybe that then this species of fish that once was a species of fish, just one species of fish, might split into two different species of fish. In this case, there's geographic separation, so that's allopatric speciation. But in this other case, the lake never is divided into two, but still another new species arises, and that's sympatric speciation, because two different species split from each other even though they're not geographically separated. There's been no geographic separation. So allopatric means other country, because patria, like if you're patriotic, you love your country. So patria means country. So allopatric means other country. So in other words, there's some sort of geographic isolation that interrupts gene flow. So a population becomes divided, and gene flow is interrupted by some geographical boundary and obstacle. So, for example, flightless birds, the flightless cormorant in the Galapagos, originated them from a species that could fly, species on the mainland that could fly. But then when it became flightless, it became separated from the populations on the mainland and eventually developed into a new species. So what is the process? The process of allopatric speciation. So there's a lot of different types of barriers, and the definition of the barrier depends on the ability of the population to disperse. So a canyon may create a barrier for small rodents, but may not be a barrier for birds or coyote or pollen. Separated populations might evolve independently through mutation, or maybe through natural selection, or maybe just through some sort of genetic drift. And so then also reproductive isolation may just arise as kind of a byproduct of some sort of genetic divergence. Genetic divergence produced by mutation, natural selection, or maybe genetic drift. So a good example then, isolated populations of little guppy-like fish called mosquito fish have become reproductively isolated as a result of natural selection under different conditions. So for example, here's two different mosquito fish. A mosquito fish in a habitat where there are predators has a body shape that enables rapid bursts of speed. But then in a pond without predators, the body shape generally favors long, steady swimming. And so if you look at their acceleration rate, those that are from a pond with predators have a higher acceleration rate than those from a pond without predators. And so those in a pond with predators can survive at a higher rate in the presence of predators than those that or from a pond with no predators. So we can look at evidence of allopatric speciation. Reproductive barriers then can develop between experimentally isolated laboratory populations. They're subjected to different environmental conditions. A good example then is fruit flies taken from the same source population are allowed to adapt to different diets over several generations. And they tend to choose mates that are adapted to the same diet. Here you can see a source population. You put some on a starch medium and some on a maltose medium, so there's two different diets. You do mating experiments, and you see that males from a starch diet tend to mate more frequently than females from a starch diet than with the maltose diet. But if they're both on starch diets, there's really no difference in the matings then. So that's interesting then. So they did that with Drosophila pseudo-obscura. So this allopatric speciation then, with the geographic barrier, has also been observed in nature. For example, sister species of snapping shrimp, Alpheus, they think maybe they diverged 3 to 9 million years ago as they became isolated by the formation of the Isthmus of Panama. So you can see here's a couple sister species here on the Atlantic side of Panama, and then here are two other species from the Pacific side of Panama. And so as a fairly good rule of thumb then, areas with many geographic barriers typically have more different species in them than regions with fewer barriers. And reproductive isolation between populations generally increases as the distance between them increases, which generally shows that, a lot of time if we think they're isolated, they're not really that isolated always from gene flow. And reproductive barriers are actually intrinsic or belong to, generally, the organisms involved. Because physical separation alone is not a biological barrier anyway. So that's allopatric speciation. So now we should look at sympatric speciation. Sympatric. So sim is the same. So sympatric, it means same country then. Sympatric speciation then is speciation that occurs in populations that live in the same geographic area, and they're in contact with each other. They're not physically separated. And so this sympatric speciation can occur if gene flow is reduced by factors that include polyploidy or sexual selection or habitat differentiation, going into different habitats. So first let's look at polyploidy then. What is polyploidy? Kind of a weird term. Polyploidy then, poly means many. Polyploidy is the presence of extra sets of chromosomes due to accidents during cell division. So polyploidy is much more common in plants than animals, because plants can handle it more easily than animals. And this polyploidy can produce new biological species in sympatry, in other words, when they're together, within a single generation. So an autopolyploid then is an individual with more than 2 chromosome sets So more than diploid, more than two chromosome sets derived from a single species. So the offspring for those matings then between polyploids and diploids have reduced fertility. So here's a diploid cell, but maybe there's a cell division error, and they actually produce a new cell that has double the number, so rather than 2N, rather than being diploid, 2N, remember, means two chromosomes from each chromosome pair. But maybe there's a cell division error and the chromosomes duplicate, but they don't divide. And so then they produce a tetraploid cell, or 4N. And then during meiosis, the gametes are 2N rather than N. And then when they fertilize each other, then they produce a zygote and in a new generation that's 4N. Then, so autopolyploidy is individuals with multiple chromosome sets from the same species. Allopolyploidy then is producing a species with multiple sets of chromosomes from different species. Chromosomes from two different species are united, and they can successfully mate with each other, but a lot of times can't interbreed with either of the parent species. And so a diploid cell from a species in which 2N is 6, and then you got a diploid cell in which 2N is 4. Well, this individual produces gametes that have 3 in them. The N number equals 3 for this species, but the N number equals 2 for this species. And then they can fertilize each. At fertilization, they produce a sterile hybrid zygote in which they've got 5 chromosomes. And the chromosomes really don't line up with each other. And so, but if there's some sort of error during mitosis or meiosis in a hybrid plant cell, then it doubles the chromosome number. And then this could be a diploid cell with 10 chromosomes, and they can be viable and fertile, and they're called allopolyploid. Then, so at least 5 new plant species have originated by polyploid speciation since 1850. And, there's a species of Tragopogon. So, 2 allopolyploid species have evolved from 3 diploid parent species. So these are wild sunflowers then. So this, this species then, Tragopogon dubius, has 12 chromosomes, but then it can produce 2 different species then that actually have basically have polyploid numbers of chromosomes, 24 each. So basically the T dubius, well, actually what I should say is T dubius and T parentis then can both mate and produce a hybrid species that has 24. So this species has 12 and this species has 12 chromosomes, and so they produce an allopolyploid offspring that has 24 chromosomes. And the same thing here, T dubius with 12 chromosomes and T porifolius with 12 chromosomes can actually get together and produce a hybrid with 24 chromosomes. And a lot of important crops that are actually polyploids, oats, cotton, potatoes, tobacco, wheat, a lot of them are polyploids. And they plant geneticists can produce polyploid things at will using chemicals that cause errors in cell division. And so there's also then the phenomenon of sexual selection as well. Sexual selection can actually cause sympatric speciation then, sexual selection. And we mentioned this in the last chapter then. It seems like sexual selection for mates of different colors has likely contributed to speciation in a cichlid fish in Lake Victoria in Africa. So basically then, in normal light, you can see these patterns on these two different species, but in monochromatic orange light, they look pretty similar. So let's see. So then there can be habitat differentiation. Sympatric speciation then can also result from the appearance of new ecological niches. So in North America, the maggot fly can live on native hawthorn trees, as well as the more recently introduced apple trees. Flies that use different host species experience both habitat and temporal isolation amongst the fruit flies. So basically then, a little bit of review then of allopatric and sympatric speciation then. So in allopatric speciation, there's some geographical isolation that restricts gene flow between populations, and that causes speciation. And reproductive isolation may then also arise as a byproduct of genetic changes resulting from divergent natural selection, genetic drift, or sexual selection. Even if contact is restored between the populations, interbreeding is prevented then if they're sufficiently different from each other. So in sympatric speciation, a reproductive barrier isolates. There's no geographic barrier, but there's a reproductive barrier that comes about that isolates a subset of the population without any geographic separation. And it can result from polyploidy or natural selection or even sexual selection as well. And so that's allopatric speciation and sympatric speciation. And I'm going to quit here now at this point. We're at slide 68. I'm going to quit here now at this point, and I will record. I'll probably record the last lecture of chapter 24. That'll be chapter 24, part 3. Probably record that sometime early tomorrow, then and put that up in the module. So as always, though, if any questions come up or anything, if there's anything you're wondering about as I go through the chapters, just let me know. Email me with questions and things, and I can answer those. So keep studying, and remember, keep checking your Gmail and your Canvas daily to keep updated with everything that's going on. So thank you again, and I'll see you next time for part 3, the last part of chapter 24. Thank you.